Hello and welcome to this poetry reading and Q&A with the wonderful poet Andrés N Ordorica as part of our LGBT History Month programme on the theme of blurring borders. So I'm Roshni, I'm a library advisor, and it's lovely to be joined by Andrés today. Andrés is a queer Latinx writer based in Edinburgh. He is a recipient of the Edwin Morgan Trust Second Life Grant. In 2021, he was shortlisted for both the Morley Prize for Unpublished Writers of Colour and Siewcharran Prize. He is the author of At Least This I Know. His book is out now and available to reserve to collect from your local library if you go to yourlibrary.edinburgh.gov.uk. And also, before we get into it, a quick content warning that this event includes some strong language. So over to Andrés.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here with you this evening to celebrate LGBT History Month and to share my perspective of what queerness means to me. And yeah, I was very chuffed when I found out what this year's theme was, blurring borders, because I hope my collection is very much in conversation with the idea of blurring borders and liminality. So my collection, At Least This I Know, it follows sort of my own storied history from childhood to adulthood, and is really about examining different facets of the self. And each poem, I think, is speaking to different parts of me, sometimes multiple facets of the self together, and sometimes very specific ones. And so the collection opens up with childhood. And so the first poem I'm going to perform is entitled Photograph. Photograph. Summer light blinds my mother, 27, with golden ponytail, curl set by that pink can of Aquanet. In her cradled arms, me and my sister, aged 6 and 4. The three of us sit still in an English garden. Rose bushes adorn us as a tree awakens its seasonal blossoms, the sun feeding us its warmth. Proper ladies sniff sprays of begonia while observing our every move. Around us nature is neatly ordered. We are three strangers in that place. We wear shorts and windbreakers, Nike high-top trainers. We always stood out that way, with father and brother directing from the other side of a lens. A photo can tell so much. Mother squinting, sister posing, brother missing, father too. Me, burrowing deep within the earth. So in the beginning section of my collection, my mother very much is a prominent feature. And for me, I always tell people my mom was the first storyteller I ever met, and probably to this day, the best storyteller I've ever met. She would never call herself a writer. She's never sort of set out to write anything probably beyond emails or work documents, but she really did show me, teach me the art of storytelling. So this poem is dedicated to her. This is Mother in the Community Pool. Mother rests on an inflatable donut. Her fair skin deepens in the afternoon sun. She likes the water, is a water baby, but is of the desert. Mother ducks under the surface, chemical golden, hair floating like tentacles atop the glassy chlorinated plain, until all of her is submerged. Mother exists in all my stories, her dreams that never came to be, her words hidden inside me. I write her into metaphor, make her heroine, mermaid, a mortal being. Mother, she splashes me playfully before drying off to have a rest, lies recumbent on a plastic lounger, curls splayed, soft and shiny all around her. Mother. Something that really features, I think, in a lot of my writing, be it my prose or poetry, is sort of this examination of anxiety and joy and depression and mental health, and sometimes it comes off in very strong ways. I think sometimes it's difficult to write about those things. Because yeah, they can bring about a lot of trauma. So this poem was really about celebrating those things that bring joy. And for me, someone who's lived a very transient life, often feeling very unrooted, and that thus bringing a sense of unsettledness, um, I'd been reflecting when I was setting out to write this poem about what constant things are there in our lives to kind of keep us fixed, to help us root. And I realized that sometimes, I look to very physical things, especially when sort of moving between countries, trying to find physical places to root myself. And one day I was sort of thinking about this very deeply, and I realized that the sky, no matter where you are in the world, is always there. And it was a very beautiful revelation to me, and something that really brought a sense of calm. And so this poem is dedicated to sort of the majesty of the sky. This is Bottled Blue. I want to capture blue, bottle it up in its effortlessly and breezy hue, take it with me on long journeys. I want that color to anoint me, wash me in Florida water, like chrism on my baptism day, cradled in my father's arms over the font. That blue follows me around like a phantom balloon whose helium never dies, long string tied to finger, a reminder. 29 years around the sun, and that color never gets old, even if I do, bright as ever and still moving. It lives in the sky, the sea, the mighty ocean. Blue can transport me back to happier times, can evoke feeling through memory, can transcend a lifetime. When you look up at the sky, untainted by clouds or rain, do you ever wonder, why does blue mean sad? For me, it means renewal. It means rebirth. Blue is redemption. Yes, I long to bottle blue, keep it safe forever until the day I need to share with you some happiness. Blue will be tied around my neck, wearing it like an amulet. I'll cross myself in its salvation. Blue, the holiest of colors. So for my next few poems, I really was starting to reflect. This comes at the sort of latter half of the collection, where I really start reflecting on physical place and land, and how land can either be something that allows a sense of rootedness, or how often it can sort of unsettle oneself when it's an unfamiliar landscape that you're trying to sort of reckon with, and what does that do for someone who feels like an outsider. So this poem is dedicated to my Scottish family, my Aberdonian family, and to the landscape of Aberdeenshire, and what a particular afternoon revealed to me. This is Benahi. We drank tea from a flask atop Benahi, remember? You showed me the land, said, "This made me." You pointed to the river, understood it to be yours. every mile of every hill, every crag woven into your DNA. Had a memory of every coordinate, and I longed for just some of it. I longed to know a land like that, close enough to feel at home, and for that home to love me back, like I was her one and only son. So this next poem of mine is one that I wrote during a session with the Writers of Color group that is hosted by the Scottish BPOC Writers Network and is led by the great Hannah Lavery, who is our Edinburgh Macker. For the past 2 years, we've been meeting quite regularly as a group, and Hannah has really set out some amazing prompts for us to really reconcile with what has been happening around the world, be it the global pandemic, be it social and racial injustices, especially at the height of the summer of 2020. And Hannah has just been a really great mentor of mine, someone who's really helped me to dive into these unsettled feelings whilst trying to sort of reach a rootedness. And yes, so this poem is Endless after Frantz Fanon. In the world through which I travel, I am endlessly in search of myself with no fixed point in mind. No longer am I Luna or Escobedo, no longer a Muñoz. Have since lost Maldonado in my story. When I landed in Basque Country, I could not even anchor Ordorica to the bloodshed of my past. I could not see myself in the vista as desperate as I was. I waded through marshland, split weathered skin on sandstone, dove into the harsh Atlantic cold. None of these lands could reflect me. Each one turned their cheek, whispering to go further, so I did. In the world through which I travel, I am continuously rewriting myself with no fixed point in mind. Because it is LGBT History Month, I wanted to be sure to include poems from the section that really deals with queerness quite head on. Like I said, a lot of my poems carry many intersections at any one time, but I did feel that it was really important, especially as a queer man in his early 30s who kind of came out a lot later in life, or later than some of my peers, to really honor that particular facet of the self and give it its own space. Yeah, and to celebrate it, but not just celebrate it, to also sort of contend with some of the deeper questions around that particular type of identity. So this poem is a poem that opens that section and was also written during my time with the Edwin Morgan Trust. I was really fortunate to receive a grant through them during the centenary of Morgan, and I sort of set out to really dig deep into Morgan's great body of work, and specifically to look at Morgan's love poems, which really just totally resonated with me. I loved the way Morgan wrote about desire and love, and it was very interesting to sort of look at those poems and understand the history and the period with which he was writing in and how often he had to sort of code himself. And now being an out queer writer in 2022, it's interesting that I can write sort of a lot more freely than Morgan, and I don't have to code myself in that way. But there is still very much, there's profound beauty being able to read yourself into his poems, you know, decades on, and understand how sort of brave it was of him to write in love in that way. So this poem is called Amor. I am going to nurture him like a nopal, make him grow pretty flowers, but remove his spiny needles, until he stands tall, until he is fully formed, until I can hold him close. Then I will gather him, take his flower and his fruit and burn it all until our love is something new. Transform it into tequila, mezcal, until our love is sotol, pulque, thick, racia, crystal clear. Like the drink, our love will be pure, will burn our tongues and throats, will bring the blues in the morning. So this poem is one, yeah, that I really like. It's a bit sexy and a bit somber, which is how some early readers of my collection have described it. And I kind of like that idea of writing desire in a sort of melancholic way, or nostalgic way better, is a better way to describe this sort of particular poem. So this is Losing Myself. I waited next to the neon lights, written in brush-stroked kanji. Tap, tap on the window pane, clouded in humid condensation. But still your smile shone through the opaque glass. I opened my door, closed my door, followed you across the street. Taquero, like te quiero, I love you. It's how you introduced yourself. You told me to undress. I did not fight your commands. You proceeded to wash my body, scrubbed soap between my legs, studied the shape of my round bottom, told me what you planned to do to it. Your tongue explored me, and I longed to know its taste. You filled my body with all of you, taught me how two bodies move as one. I wondered if it were possible to break a body in this way. When I left your place, I could not be certain I was the same. I opened my door, closed my door, rolled down the window to defog the car. I looked up at the neon sign and drew in the air, let it fill my body, exhaling as both the old me and the one about to drive away. So this poem is going to be, it's not my penultimate poem, but it's one of my last few. This poem is, I love this poem, and it's a bit funny and it's a bit weird, and it is based on um, a, a very sort of strange romantic, not romantic moment in my life where I met someone on a plane in the strangest of circumstances. It was at the height of swine flu, so a decade ago, and we were grounded on a plane together for almost 7 hours. And that's a really long time to spend with someone you don't know. And this poem is written in memory of that person and what could have been but never happened. This is Newark Liberty International Airport. In a departure lounge in the state of New Jersey, the least beautiful one, that's where I first saw you. You were older than me, with beautiful blue eyes lined with circles like a trunk of sequoia. Your name Adam, meaning to be red, meaning to make, made from dirt. Like the first man, Adam, my first man, Adam, my man, made fantasy. While the plane taxied, you asked me questions of my travels to come while I made up our story, blurring our present and future with memories of your hands, tracing our timeline together, tracing the outline of our love. I dreamt of our first good morning as the sun rose above the Pacific, as the sun shone brightly on your face, as I imagined you kissing me. We'd talk between the midnight hours over a meal which I could not say was breakfast or dinner, but would be our first together. At the baggage carousel, I would bump into you, tired but still enamored, happy to see your familiar face. I would want to be braver, want to invite you to my room, want to feel your hands span the time zones of my body. But I'd simply say goodbye as you kissed me on the cheek and wished me well, waving me off into the ether. You see, I once met an Adam, seated next to me on a plane, introduced myself to him, did nothing to become his Eve. So this is going to be my penultimate poem. This poem, I've already mentioned, I'm very grateful and very fortunate to be a member of the Writers of Color group that's led by Hannah Lavery. I think if you are a budding writer, or even if you're an established writer, I think being in a writers group is just can be such a fundamentally important aspect of growing one's practice and one's craft, and also just the camaraderie that one can gain from other writers. So this is dedicated to my writers group. This is Ceremony. The tea is steeping in cracked porcelain, hibiscus, chamomile, Darjeeling, and black leaves brewing. Their colorful oils like a spectrum creeping out the muslin and filling the pot with mixed flavor. If you took our community, steeped us all in one copper container, what would the drink taste like? Many nations, shades, colors, all mapping out diasporas, melding into one watered down history. Left together to brew in collective trauma, but we are not of one single origin nor a single blend. And yet, our tea is steeping in an ancient cauldron with leaves kept intact by the strength of our design. So this is my last poem that I'll be performing for you. It is actually the epilogue of the collection. Like I said, when I set out to write this collection, it really was about taking the reader through a journey from childhood into adulthood in the aims of trying to reach some sense of rootedness, or find by the end at least what rootedness might mean. So this last poem is called Mis Raíces, which in Spanish means my roots. We are in the desert, lips cracked, mouth dried like freshly milled maize. The ground sighs as if inconvenienced by each of our steps over its thirsty ochre. There are tall green nopales lined in neat rows, reminding me how even here abundance is possible. Grandfather asks me my thoughts of the land, so I ask him if this is where we come from. Sí, mijo, half of you is from this desert. I lick my lips, parched like the earth, take my boots off, then my dirty socks, stomp my feet to the beat of the jarabe tapatio, digging deeper into the soil with each kick. What are you doing? Asks my grandfather. I want to be a nopal, papa. I want to grow. So he leaves me, then returns with a shovel, carefully plants me into this weathered landscape. Afterward, he kisses me goodbye with such strength before patting my soft head, and in his touch, I know I will be fine here. All will be fine. The desert is mine if I want it. Here I'll learn how to grow. And so my grandfather begins the return journey alone. The ground calls after him, but I stay quiet because I know I will be fine here. All will be fine. I am the true vine, and the desert is my gardener. It's mine to inherit because I am of both land and root.
Thank you so much for that. That was gorgeous.
Thank you.
So yeah, we'll just get into some questions.
Perfect.
As we both mentioned, the theme of LGBT History Month is blurring borders. And that is a theme that speaks strongly to your work, from physical borders to more invisible borders. Yeah, so I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about that, how you think your work blurs borders.
Yes, I think for me, what really fascinates me about this idea is it really does feel intrinsic to my understanding of the self. You know, I was born in the US. I'm a second generation American, so all four of my grandparents came to the US in the early 1960s from Mexico. And it's really interesting when you grow up in the US as part of the Latinx or Hispanic diaspora, and how one gets read as being American. You know, you can have, like me, a very pronounced sort of West Coast accent, but when your body is sort of racialized and read in a certain way, how then like this idea of where is home? You know, I grew up being told, you know, you are American, but Mexico is also your homeland. That's where your people come from. But you know, my parents weren't even born in Mexico. I didn't go to Mexico for the first time until I was much older, well past being a child. You know, I was a preteen. And so this idea of like borders and being fixed in any one place, it just is not true to sort of my own existence. You know, we followed my father's career in the US Air Force around the world, so I feel very much like a third culture kid. And so this idea of like where then, if these borders don't exist, or actually they're a lot more sort of transient and unfixed than people might think. How do we play with that? How do I play with that as a poet? And I think for me, the opening poem to the collection, which serves as a prologue, very much is about interrogating that head on. And in it, the speaker is landing in an airport trying to claim a form of immigration, or starting his immigration process and working through the hostile environment within the UK and EU immigration system. And for me, it really sort of sets out the whole concept of the collection of a speaker so desperately trying to do away with borders and kind of cast out a very wide net. And in it, the speaker is sort of referencing all these different groups or subgroups. You know, he talks about these different indigenous tribes from all the different lands that he can lay claim to, different countries that he's lived, different sort of subgroups within the queer community. And so for me, I really am interested in subverting these notions of borders because, yes, I've had to go through just the ups and downs of administrative BS, like dealing with immigration. But then also, you know, I think my identity has never been one that's just been could clearly sort of sit with any one place. So, you know, to have an American passport, to be American, but then not always be allowed to be American, or to be questioned, you know, where are you really from? Oh, your family is from Mexico, so you're Mexican. It's like, well, no, I don't have a Mexican passport. My Spanish isn't that great. So, you know, the place that I am from, that I have sort of the most legal claim to, doesn't always allow me to lay claim to it. So then, do borders exist, or actually are they a lot more blurry than maybe we're led to believe?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that brings me on to my next question. So, like, rootedness and home come up a lot in your collection as well. And I'm wondering how you create that home and that belonging.
For me, I think it's really about finding community in other people. And so, you know, I have said, like, my writers group is a place that I really feel a sense of belonging in Scotland. What I love about it is a mix of people like me who have emigrated to Scotland much later in life. You know, there are also people who are born and bred in the UK, but maybe have come over from Northern Ireland or from Wales or from England. And then there are just heaps of Scottish people, but who are all kind of contending with these ideas of race or perceived race. And like, you know, so like you can be be, you know, born in South Glasgow and have like the most Glaswegian accent. But, you know, if, you know, you come or you have some sort of African or Caribbean heritage, like how your body is then read and you're asked to sort of make allegiances to places. So for me, being amongst people who can have sort of shared experiences of that, or sort of even share war stories, but also kind of do away with trauma and sort of say, okay, enough with that. Like, also, what is joyous about where we, how do we bring in all these different ideas? You know, you can love Scotland and love lots of aspects of Scottish culture and still lay claim to motherlands or other places, and it's not either one for the other. And so for me, it really is about people and community that helps me find a sense of rootedness. Um, and then I think also just really digging deep into my own sort of family history and kind of realizing, you know, I am now I, during the same age that my grandparents would have gone through it, I too have like immigrated to somewhere new and like had to navigate that. And so I think that also allows me, in a strange sense, to feel slightly rooted because I know it's been done before and it can be done before and you can survive it and you can build a fully fledged life. So yeah, I think it's both community in the spaces in which I operate or choose to live, but also a bit of looking backwards and thinking about my own family story and how, you know, who in my past has made that decision to kind of up and leave and try to make home somewhere new.
So one thing about your collection that I really love is how Spanish sort of bleeds in sometimes. Like often people speak to you in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering when and why you use Spanish in your collection.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you picked up on the fact that it's often people speaking to me. I think in choosing to write about, especially my grandparents, I felt like the most authentic or honorable way to have them as a present is in their mother tongue. You know, my grandparents were not the most confident English speakers. Um, Two of them are still alive, and you know, even though they had been living in the U.S. for over 50 years, they just were able to kind of carve a life for them with other Mexican immigrants, and therefore were able to sort of get by. And I often talk about how my mother growing up with her parents was often had to be the translator. So you know, at age 8 would be going to the bank with her parents and speaking, you know, to these sort of scary older men, like talking about big sums of money and trying to get, you know, a mortgage or this or that. And so for me to really have them there, I wanted them there in Spanish because that's how I grew up with my grandparents. Like I said, I'm not the most confident Spanish speaker, but I can speak Spanish, and I did grow up speaking Spanish to my grandparents. Um, or sometimes though, like how often happens in the collection, you know, they would speak Spanish and I would totally understand them fluently, and I would speak back in English and they would understand me, and that would also be our own unique way of communicating. So for me, I wanted that authenticity of my very specific experience of being part of the Latinx diaspora to exist in that way within the poems. And then elsewhere, I think it was just about choosing to pepper in throughout the collection certain words that I just find a lot more beautiful in Spanish than I do in English. And I think, you know, like lots of sort of Latin-based languages, the rhyming scheme is a lot easier because, you know, more often than not, words either end in O or A, and so you can play around a lot more. And so yeah, I think, you know, primarily it was really allowing my grandparents to exist in these poems how they always were to me, and that was speaking Spanish. Um, and then also it was just a means of sort of anchoring myself in a way to my culture. And I think a lot of times language is one of the easiest ways to do that, or one of the most profound ways of doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that beauty in the language does really come through when you have just the one word in Spanish. Yeah. So yeah, how do the themes of vulnerability and celebration coexist in your work?
Yeah, I think for this collection in particular, in order to me to ultimately go through that arc of that sort of opening poem, kind of coming out of the gates right away and sort of saying, you know, I'm so desperate to claim home. Anyone who allows me, you know, I'm just ready for belonging. I think that is inherently a very vulnerable thing to ask of the reader, you know, because in essence, the reader is part of any one of those named groups of sort of saying, can you offer me that? Can you offer me a sense of home? Um, and I think vulnerability also comes out a lot in, you know, a lot of these poems are dealing with loss, and loss of homeland, loss of youth, and then loss of people. And, you know, there are a lot of poems that are written in a very eulogy-like way, for particularly a friend that I was really close with throughout high school who ended up passing away after second year of university. And then to both my grandmother and grandfather who both have passed away. And I think that vulnerability in choosing to talk about death so openly, and also in some of those poems to actually take the reader to the moment of finding out about someone passing, is a very vulnerable act. But my hope then is that it allows readers the opportunity to process either their own loss or to kind of to find comfort, you know, solace in those poems, and then actively kind of work towards joy and celebration, because I think sort of by exposing those vulnerabilities, hopefully then by the closing of the collection, the reader is able to celebrate with me, at least in the last poem, this sense of rootedness that I have reached, you know. And then I think, especially in the section that deals with queerness, there are some poems in there that are revisiting sort of the difficulty that I had in coming out and kind of sort of navigating in within this new world of what it means to be part of this community, and how that can kind of unsettle oneself when you're kind of trying to relearn how to be in the world. That then I think that section is followed by a section that's dedicated to my husband and their love poems, or different types of love poems. And I feel like that also can be a celebration, because it's sort of mapping out someone's journey of contending with these things. Because as happy, you know, and it's a great thing to be celebrating LGBT History Month, but I think it also would be it would be negligible to not also acknowledge that for lots of people, the journey towards coming out can be very difficult. But again, one of my big aims in dealing either with queerness or immigration or racial identity or racism was not to sort of just stay within the trauma. It was also ultimately about reaching joy and sort of confidently taking a seat at the table and sort of saying, I understand now this facet of myself, and this is what I know about it, and this is what I choose to share with you, the reader.
Yeah, a journey to joy. That's a really lovely sort of way of thinking about it. So yeah, when I was reading your collection, I was really struck by your use of color. So even the cover, like this orangey red, and you have a poem about vermilion, you have bottled blue, you have that tangerine river. Yeah, and what draws you to color?
I think for me, color just feels so true to my cultural background. You can see my very colorful guayabera from Mexico, from the state of Oaxaca. But for me, color is such an important part of memory. And I think a lot of these poems are working through a type of memory, or through a nostalgic lens, or trying to kind of find meaning whilst looking back retrospectively. And for me, memory is so based in sensory, and one of the most profound senses to me is like sight and color, and especially within nature. I just think, as I speak to you, I have like my bouquet of roses, which are just these beautiful bright orange roses, which again reminds me of my grandmother. She always had this beautiful garden that she took care of. And I think these ideas then, in order, sort of similar to my use of language, to try to write towards some form of authenticity or a truth in what these memories are based within. Color is like really important to me, because I think that vibrancy, if a color still sits with you years on, then it must be important to you for some reason, or to me as the poet, as the one working through these memories. And so yeah, I think for me it's another way of anchoring within my sort of huge photo album of memories, and thinking of very specific things. I think also color to me can also be very physical. It can be tied to like physical feeling, like warmth. Often, I think of being like in Mexico, or where my parents live in South Texas, or where my grandparents now live in California, and that heat and the way the sky looks a very particular shade of blue. Or what is it like, to be walking atop really hot terracotta tiles and that kind of rusty orange, that, whilst your sort of flip-flops are going clackety clack, and all of them, these different types of senses are tied back in, but ultimately like rooted into the color. The color is the most profound thing. And so I'm glad that then that is something that comes through for a lot of those poems. And then, like you said, there are some poems that are just like straight, doing what they say on the tin, like Neroli Kiss, or 8 Synonyms for Vermilion, or Bottle Blue, are all dedicated to these different colors or different shades of a specific color that have had such like a profound, lasting effect on me.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about color and memory. So yeah, makes a lot of sense now you say it. Yeah, I guess moving on to my last question now, just about which poets have inspired you and this collection, and also if you can recommend any queer or LGBT poets for our audience to look up after this.
Totally. So this collection very specifically was inspired by the work of Edwin Morgan, Danae Smith, who's an amazing queer American poet, and how they write about desire and sex and even race and racism is just profound. Natalie Diaz and her collection Post-Colonial Love Poem really was something that resonated with me. And then Nadine Aisha Jasset, who's Let Me Tell You This, also published by 404 Inc., and who is a very good friend of mine. I like to think that our collections are speaking to each other in that way. Who else? Ada Limon, who's like me, is a Mexican-American poet, her work, and Mary Oliver. And then, I don't think I said it, last but not least, is Nina Mingya Pao, who is an amazing, amazing poet. And how Nina writes of like memory and family and growing up between cultures, and often how our mother tongues can be an access point, especially to our grandparents, but that if we're not confident in it, how sometimes that lack of communication, what we lose out on. How more robust could our relationships with our grandparents be if we felt more confident and fluent in our mother tongues? And so how Nina writes about that in her collection Magnolia really just blew my mind, and I think really inspires a lot of a fair few poems. And queer poets in general that I would recommend. Harry Josephine Giles, her poetry is beautiful. Tungnuit, which I believe is published by Stud Rhubarb Press, is amazing. It's written in the Orkney dialect. Who else is there? Andrew McMillan is another poet that I find is really profound in how he writes about queer relationships. And Joelle Taylor. Joelle Taylor's collection Kunto is beautiful, and it's very much about honoring her very specific community, of butch lesbians during the 80s and 90s, and a history that has been done away with through gentrification and losing out on bars and clubs that she would often frequent. And again, I think is a poet doing really interesting things. I really recommend the collection. It plays with form and style in such a brilliant way. Is written at times like a play text, and you're reading it, and there's like lighting design, lighting cues, sound cues, but are written very knowingly and very poetically. Yeah, I just think there are so many beautiful queer writers, both in the UK and the wider and then around the world, who are just doing stunning things. So, do support your library and go get those collections.
Yeah, some wonderful poets there. I just want to thank you for reading from your work today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a great pleasure to celebrate LGBT History Month. Yeah, and share my work this evening with you and the audience.
Thank you. And At Least This I Know is available to buy now.